Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to demystify the building blocks of our universe. We're going to prove that the periodic table is absolutely not some intimidating, random grid, but actually a highly logical map. A lot of people look at this table and just see this confusing jumble of letters and numbers, right? But today, we are going to uncover the hidden rules that make it literally one of the most brilliant organizational tools in human history. Okay, let's dive right in by imagining two totally different shopping experiences. Say you're trying to find a specific brand of toothpaste. In the first scenario, you walk into a massive room where every single item is just piled up in this giant, chaotic, Egyptian-style pyramid, totally unsorted. Finding that toothpaste would be a complete nightmare. But now, compare that to walking into an organized mall. You've got neatly sorted sections for drinks, groceries, and a very specific aisle for dental care, where you can easily compare exact brands and flavors. Well, the periodic table is exactly like that organized mall. Without it, chemistry would just be a chaotic pyramid of unsorted information. So here is our itinerary for today's explainer. We're going to move from the basic layout straight into the behavioral trends, hitting on the need for classification, groups and periods, the atomic size paradox, the shift from metals to nonmetals, the rules of reactivity, and finally, top-to-bottom trends. All right, starting with Section 1, the need for classification. Let's look at why scientists spent literal centuries trying to get this organization right. Think about carbon for a second. Studying just this one element and all its compounds takes up an entire branch of chemistry. If we had to study all 118 elements individually from scratch, a single human lifetime just wouldn't be enough. Classification provides this single-glance view. It's much like opening a perfectly organized wardrobe or scrolling through a curated Instagram profile. Just like opening your wardrobe lets you instantly see all your outfits and figure out what goes together, grouping elements allows us to instantly compare properties. This means if you study just one element in a group, like lithium, you suddenly know the secrets of a bunch of others in that same group, like sodium and potassium. It just makes learning incredibly efficient. Moving right along to Section 2, groups and periods explained. Let's break down the basic structure and see how we actually read this chemical map. So, past scientists like Mendeleev originally tried organizing the elements by their atomic mass. And, well, that led to a lot of errors and mismatches. But the modern table brilliantly arranges elements by their increasing atomic number, meaning the number of protons they have. And by doing this, a kind of magical thing happens. Their properties start to repeat periodically. It's like the 8 notes in music looping back around. The chemical properties of elements loop back and repeat at highly predictable intervals. To read this map, you really just need to remember 2 directions. First, we have 18 vertical columns called groups. Elements in the same group are essentially family. They share the exact same number of valence electrons, those electrons in their outermost shell. Second, we have 7 horizontal rows called periods. Elements moving across the same period share the exact same number of total electron shells. So groups tell you the outer electron count, and periods tell you the shell count. Pretty simple, right? Now let's jump into Section 3, the atomic size paradox, and explore the left-to-right trends that dictate pretty much everything else. Let's play a quick logic game. As you move left to right across a period, say from sodium over to chlorine, the atomic numbers get bigger. They're getting more protons and more electrons. So, logically, the atom itself should naturally get larger, right? I mean, more stuff means a bigger size, doesn't it? Actually, wrong. And this is exactly where the paradox comes in. Because we are moving across the same horizontal period, the new electrons are being added to the exact same outer shell. But meanwhile, protons are increasing in the center nucleus. So you have this stronger positive charge in the center pulling on a negative shell that isn't getting any further away. This electrostatic attraction acts like a super powerful magnet. As you move left to right, this magnetic pull gets stronger and stronger, pulling the outer shell tighter and actually shrinking the atom. It's completely counterintuitive, but it is absolutely the golden rule of the table. And that domino effect brings us straight to Section 4, metals to nonmetals shift, where we look at the shifting characters of these elements. Because the atom shrinks from left to right, the nucleus holds onto its outer electrons so much tighter. Think about it. If an atom is really large, the outer electrons are far from the nucleus, right? So they're super easy to lose. This tendency to lose electrons is called electropositivity, and it's exactly what makes a great metal. But as the atom shrinks from left to right, electropositivity drops.
Conversely, electronegativity, which is the tendency to pull in and gain new electrons, drastically rises. Why? Because the nucleus is now so close to the surface, it can easily snatch electrons from other atoms.
So, the really crucial takeaway here is that the extreme left of the table houses the best, most eager to lose electron metals, like the group 1 alkali metals. They are literally the largest atoms in their period. On the flip side, the extreme right, specifically group 17, the halogens, houses the smallest, most greedy, electron-hungry nonmetals. They are practically fighting to steal electrons. By just knowing that moving left to right shrinks size, you instantly know exactly where the best metals and nonmetals live. Let's see how all this builds into Section 5, the rules of reactivity, which is based entirely on valency needs. You see, reactivity is heavily tied to valency. Think of valency as an element's needs, how many electrons it has to lose, gain, or share to be perfectly stable. As we move across a period, ignoring the transition metals in the middle for a second, the valency perfectly climbs from 1 up to 4 at group 14, and then it drops right back down, 3, 2, 1, and finally hits a big 0 for the noble gases in group 18. Now here's the real secret to reactivity. Elements with lower needs react much faster. If you only need to lose one single electron, like group 1, or gain just one electron, like group 17, you are highly desperate and incredibly reactive. But if you're sitting right in the middle at group 14, like silicon, you need to manage 4 whole electrons. That takes way more work, making you far less reactive. Therefore, reactivity across a period forms this giant arc. It's incredibly high at the group 1 and group 17 edges, but dips extremely low in the middle at group 14. This arc is super predictable once you just understand their valency needs. Finally, let's look at Section 6, top to bottom trends. Let's explore what happens when we jump in an elevator and descend the groups. When moving top to bottom, say from lithium way down to francium, the outer valence electron count stays perfectly identical. They all just have one outer electron. However, there's a major structural change happening. An entirely new electron shell is added with each downward step, so it goes from having 2 shells to 3 to 4 and so on. Because of this, unlike our left-to-right paradox where adding particles actually cause shrinking, moving top to bottom absolutely and dramatically increases the overall atomic size of the elements. With every step down, you're adding a whole new protective layer, pushing the outer edge further and further away from the nucleus. And this makes it incredibly easy for those bottom-heavy elements to just lose their outer electrons. And this brilliantly illustrates the true power of this map. This entire grid is just so incredibly logical, with predictable left-to-right shrinking and top-to-bottom expanding, that it leaves us with one thrilling question to end on. Could you use these very trends to predict the exact chemistry, reactivity, and size of elements that don't even exist yet? Well, scientists have been doing exactly that for decades, naming and describing elements years before they're ever synthesized in a lab. The periodic table isn't just a list of what we know, it's literally a crystal ball for what we have yet to discover. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you never look at this brilliant map